Welcome back to What We Have in Common. I'm Darren Hamilton. Now, before the intermission episodes, we spent several episodes talking about issues where the Republicans and Libertarians overlap. Local control, property rights, fiscal responsibility, regulatory barriers. So you might assume that the next step is here's where Democrats and Republicans diverge. But that's not actually the interesting part. The interesting part is this. There are entire categories of issues where Democrats and Republicans already agree. They just can't agree that they agree. Let me start with something mildly controversial. Most American politics isn't disagreement. It's choreography, very expensive choreography, performed by people who insist that they're mortal enemies while repeatedly voting for versions of the same underlying ideas with different branding packages. And I know that sounds cynical, but I'm a Libertarian candidate in Texas, so cynical is part of the onboarding paperwork. It's like watching two people argue over whether they like the same movie while both quoting the same lines. And here's where my favorite campaign question comes in. Then what? Because agreeing that something is a problem isn't the same as solving it. Healthcare is expensive. Then what? Government is too big. Then what? We need election reform. Then what? The answer to that question usually tells you far more than the slogan ever will. And that brings me to what I call the universal government test. It's incredibly simple. If you wouldn't trust the people you voted against with a particular government power, don't give that power to the people you voted for. Because governments don't keep campaign promises. Governments keep powers. And political majorities are temporary. Sooner or later, the other team gets the keys to the minivan. So let's look at 5 issues that supposedly divide America, but somehow nobody actually owns. Issue 1, privacy. Ask Democrats if privacy matters. Absolutely, they say. They'll talk about surveillance capitalism, corporate data collection, digital tracking, government overreach. Ask Republicans, same answer. Federal surveillance, government intrusion, digital monitoring, financial tracking, gun registries that somehow start as just a database. Democrats say your personal data shouldn't be harvested by giant corporations. Republicans say your personal data shouldn't be harvested by giant government agencies. Libertarians hear both arguments and ask a simple question. So, who exactly is supposed to be collecting all of my personal information? Apparently, the answer is yes. Today, your phone knows where you've been, what you've bought, who you talked to, what you've searched for at 2 a.m, and probably whether you've developed an unhealthy fascination with miniature goats. And somewhere there's a government office saying, we'd like a copy of that. Enter Steve. Steve works for the Department of Mind Your Own Business. Steve insists he doesn't want to invade your privacy. He just needs access to your location history, purchase history, browser history, financial records, medical information, travel records, facial recognition database, and maybe your smart refrigerator. For your safety, of course. Because nothing says privacy like Steve keeping a scrapbook. So then what? If everyone agrees that privacy matters, then why does every crisis somehow end with Steve getting another filing cabinet full of our lives? And here's the universal government test. If you don't want the other party having this surveillance power, why are you comfortable letting your party build it? Because eventually, they will get a turn. Issue 2, anti-corruption. Democrats promise campaign finance reform. Republicans promise to drain the swamp. Washington somehow manages to hold ribbon-cutting ceremonies for brand new swamp expansions. Every election cycle we're told this time will be different. This time the insiders are finally going to lose. This time the lobbyists are finally going home. This time the special interests are finally going to stop writing legislation. And somehow every election ends with lobbyists throwing a reunion party. Steve assures us that there's no corruption. It's called stakeholder engagement, or public-private partnership, or my personal favorite, strategic collaboration, which is the government's way of saying we're all golfing together, but technically it's for democracy. Now, ask yourself, then what? If everyone agrees money has too much influence, then why does every election somehow cost more than the last one? If corruption is universally hated, why is fighting corruption one of the country's most successful fundraising industries? And here's the universal government test. If you wouldn't trust your political opponents to write billion-dollar checks into the political process, stop building a political process where anyone can. Issue 3, corporate welfare. This one almost feels like performance art. Republicans say government shouldn't pick winners and losers. Democrats say billion-dollar corporations shouldn't receive taxpayer handouts. Congress hears both arguments and responds, "Excellent! We'll do exactly that." Welcome to another season of America's Next Top Subsidy. Congratulations, you built a profitable corporation. Here's a tax break. Congratulations, you lost billions of dollars. Here's an even bigger tax break. Congratulations, you promised to create jobs. We won't be checking. Steve insists that this isn't favoritism. It's an economic development initiative. Steve also thinks putting ranch dressing on pizza counts as a culinary innovation. So here's my question. Then what? If everyone opposes corporate welfare, then why is it one of the few government programs with bipartisan job security? Apparently, the only industry that ever needs a bailout is the bailout industry. Issue 4, criminal justice reform. This one's fascinating because it's one of the clearest examples of ideological overlap. Conservatives talk about abuse of power, due process, overcriminalization, the Constitution. Progressives talk about systemic injustice, disproportionate punishment, accountability, fairness. Libertarians mostly keep asking why we've created a system where government almost never admits mistakes unless it loses in court 20 years later. Everybody agrees innocent people shouldn't be punished. Everybody agrees government power should have limits. Everybody agrees justice should actually be, just. Steve loves mandatory minimum sentences. They're efficient. Thinking is expensive. Steve also believes every new law deserves a felony attached to it. Keeps things organized. Now, ask the obvious question. Then what? If everyone agrees the system gets things wrong, then why is Steve still grading his own homework? Here's the universal government test. If you wouldn't trust your political opponents with expanded police powers, expanded prosecutorial discretion, expanded surveillance, or expanded sentencing authority, why are you comfortable giving those powers to your own side? Because eventually, your side loses elections too. Issue 5, government transparency. This one should be the easiest one. You should know what your government is doing. That's not radical. That's a minimum requirement for self-government. Every politician promises transparency, which apparently means you're absolutely entitled to know what's happening, just as soon as they finish redacting everything explaining what happened. Steve would love to answer your public records request. He's currently processing submissions received during the Obama administration. Your request has been placed in the same folder as "We'll circle back," out of an abundance of caution, and the printer is down. Meanwhile, discovering how your tax dollars were actually spent often feels less like citizenship and more like trying to steal nuclear launch codes. So then what? If transparency is universally popular, then why does government become mysteriously opaque the moment you ask an inconvenient question? So, let's summarize. Privacy, everyone says yes. Anti-corruption, everyone says yes. Corporate welfare, skepticism, everyone says yes. Criminal justice reform, everyone says yes. Transparency, everyone says yes. So, if we agree on all of this, why does it feel like we agree on absolutely nothing? Now here's where my autistic brain starts doing what it does best, pattern recognition. Delivered piping hot in under 30 minutes. Every one of these issues follows exactly the same script. Both parties identify a real problem. Both parties promise to solve it. Steve gets promoted. And that's why I keep coming back to then what? Because saying privacy matters isn't a plan. Saying corruption is bad isn't a plan. Saying we need transparency isn't a plan. The real question is, what powers are we creating? Who gets them? Who keeps them? And who watches the watchers? This is actually one of the reasons why I'm running for the Texas House. Not because I think libertarians have a monopoly on good ideas. We absolutely don't. Good ideas belong to whoever has them. Bad ideas too. I'm running because somebody has to keep asking the question our politics seems to keep trying to avoid. Then what? Because every campaign has promises, every legislature has bills, every press conference has applause lines. But very few people stop long enough to ask what happens after Steve gets another office, another budget, another exception, another emergency power, another database, another regulation, another agency, another reason why this time is different. That's the conversation I'd like us to have. If Democrats and Republicans already agree on so many fundamental problems, then maybe the real divide isn't between left and right. Maybe it's between citizens and incentives. Because most Americans aren't ideologically incompatible. They're structurally misaligned. They want many of the same outcomes. They just don't trust the same mechanisms. Sometimes Democrats are right. Sometimes Republicans are right. Sometimes Libertarians are right. And sometimes all three are arguing over the thermostat while Steve quietly remodels the house. So I'll leave you with this last question. If we already agree on this much, who benefits from convincing us that we don't? Because once you ask that question, the map of American politics starts looking very different. Not red, not blue, just ordinary Americans trying to keep Steve from redecorating the Constitution. I'm Darren Hamilton, Libertarian candidate for Texas House District 57. My campaign isn't built around telling you what to think. It's built around asking one question. Then what? Because every new law, every new regulation, every new agency, every new emergency power will eventually belong to someone you didn't vote for. So before we give government another power, put it through the universal government test. If you wouldn't trust the other party with it, don't give it to yours, because sooner or later, Steve gets promoted. Liberty doesn't depend on electing better rulers. It depends on limiting the power of whoever wins. And if you found this useful, like, subscribe, and share.